This is the one where if you forget it, you show up an hour late, right? I think so. Do you show up early or late? See, I always get confused every... Good thing my phone changes automatically now, so. Well, good to see you this morning, and wow, March 1st, we made it through a really warm seasonal February, and I guess we're going to get a little snow today, right? No? No snow? All right. All right. We have it on authority. No snow today, right? All right. Good to see you. We're in a series called Adventures in Love, and we've been talking, first of all, about God of love and really trying to examine some of our beliefs about God so that we can actually realize that worshiping a God of love, not a God of violence, not a God of punishment, not a God of all these other kinds of things that aren't so loving. And so we worked on that. Then we're moving into how we love one another. So God of love, love one another, and then we're going to talk about loving ourselves as well, self-compassion. So the last few weeks I've been talking about loving one another, and I've been trying to point out how emotional intelligence focuses on not only our own self-awareness, but also social awareness. And a lot of the things that we get in conflict about aren't always right and wrong. Sometimes they're just differences in, and I've pointed out, differences in personality, differences in love language, differences in family systems. It's not just men are from Mars and women are from Venus. It's like every person you encounter is from a different planet, all right? It's all of us come from, we have different genetic history, different socialization, different trauma. And so all of us bring a set of things to any relationship that is extremely different from the person that we're interacting with. And so we've talked about personality, love language, family systems. Last week we talked about attachment theory. Today we're going to talk about conflict resolution. I titled it Crucial Conversations, which conflict resolution certainly would be crucial conversations, right? Some of us are so afraid of conflict that crucial conversation sounds a little less volatile than conflict resolution skills, right? Oh, my thing fell off. All right. Thank you. People online, hello. Was it off for a little while?
Just for a second.
Okay.
You were in a sentence.
Okay, so today you want to look at how do we deal with conflict and conflict skills. Every person that you spend time with is a potential person to have conflict with, right? In fact, I like to say if you put two people in the same room together long enough, you're going to have some conflict. So marriage is the perfect setup for conflict, and so are families, having kids, community work, organizations, churches. You can have conflict with work, coworkers, every kind of organization or family system that you put people together long enough, you're going to have some conflict. It's going to happen. There's no way around it. And I like to say this, conflict in and of itself is not bad. It can be actually healthy. It can actually help us grow if we handle it well. And so it's really about how you handle conflict that makes it unhealthy or healthy or unhealthy, not conflict itself. Conflict is going to happen, okay? So I've been around a little bit, had some conflict, dealt with some conflict, led staffs that had conflict, been in families that had conflict, all kinds of stuff, right? One of the things I've noticed is that most people, I'm guarantee you over 50% of the people that you bump into are conflict avoidant. They don't like conflict, they want to avoid it, and they'll go to great lengths to avoid conflict. even though they have it. They'll try to avoid it, right? One of the things that I've noticed that happens in most situations where conflict exists is, one, there's some people who, because of fear of conflict, will avoid it at all costs, and they'll do something else called triangulation, okay? This is an indirect way of dealing with conflict. So let's just say that me and Larry have a conflict, but I'm afraid to talk to Larry about the conflict. So what do I do if I'm triangulating? I'm going to go over here to Candace and say, Candace, you know what Larry did? Yeah. And then she might want to agree with me because I'm with her right now. And so now we've got a team against Larry, right? And yeah, so yeah. And that's classic triangulation. I don't deal with the person that I should deal with. I go over here and deal. Now we got a triangle going, okay? And I could bring in more than Candace. I could bring in several groups of people. In social media, you can bring in all kinds of people, right? And so that is almost always rooted in fear in the person who's triangulating, okay? The other thing that happens quite a bit is you have people who have passive-aggressive type personalities. And again, it's rooted in fear, but they will never be honest with you face to face. And then they will work against you behind your back, okay? So these two things are indirect ways and unhealthy ways of dealing with conflict. Jesus taught a very direct way of dealing with conflict. I want to read you just one verse from Jesus out of the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, verse 23, 24. He says, if you're presenting a sacrifice at the altar in the temple and you suddenly remember that someone has something against you. So, this could be somebody that you might have hurt, or you've had a misunderstanding with, you've had a conflict with it, and you go to the temple to worship, to pray, to make an offering, to give yourself, all that stuff. And Jesus is saying, hey, if you're at the temple and worship, but you know somebody out there has something against you, it's such a big priority to do conflict resolution or reconciliation that go ahead and just stop. And he says, then leave your sacrifice there at the altar, go and be reconciled to that person, then come and offer your sacrifice to God. So I think it's interesting that Jesus ties conflict resolution into the worship setting. Because I think one of the values that we have is that worship, love of God and love of others, is a part of how we live and worship. And so having good conflict resolution skills is a part of our worship experience. If we can reconcile with people, that's a beautiful thing in the heart of God. And it goes well for humanity and for your family and your friends and all that kind of stuff. So worship and loving others and reconciling when there's conflict is all a part of worship. I like to see it that way. It's not just whether they have something against us, but it's also if we happen to have something against somebody else. And so we're called to be reconcilers. It takes courage to be direct rather than indirect. Fear-based relationships are always indirect, but courage is always direct. Jesus teaches us to be direct. You can go to Matthew 18 as well and another set of examples there. So I'm going to just talk through a couple of conflict resolution skills that I think are very, very important. And the first one, you remember Stephen Covey's book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People? One of the habits is seek to understand first. Seek to understand first. And I think in that chapter, man, this is going back a long time, but I think he gives an example of where he's on a bus and there's a dad there with his kids on the bus, and the kids are going crazy on the bus and messing with everybody on the bus, and the person's sitting there in judgment, like, why doesn't that? And they finally talk to the parent, why aren't you taking care of your kids? They're messing up the whole bus ride, And the guy was kind of in a daze, and he says, well, my wife just passed. And he was off in another world, in grief, mourning, all the things that happen with the loss of a loved one. All of a sudden, your whole judgment changes, right? Because why? You have understanding. So the first thing I think is that if you have a problem with somebody or you think somebody has a problem with you, then the best thing to do is get face to face. It's my first recommendation. Don't do it by email or by text. The next best to face would be Zoom, okay? Because why? Because a lot of our body language communicates things that our words don't communicate. How many of you have ever had a misunderstanding through texting? Yeah, especially on the nights you've had a little too much to drink, and then I dial, what's the Noah Kahn song? Dial drunk. Anyway, drunk texting, all that. Yeah. You wake up in the morning like, what did I say last night? And it's there on record. Sure what it is. So, get face to face. When you get face to face, what are you doing? Are you trying to defend yourself? Or are you trying to seek to understand? So I want to suggest that you have some courage and you seek to understand first. And to do that, you kind of got to ask some good questions. Because you get face to face, and I think about having a table, we want to get everything out on the table, right? And you want to do that with good listening skills. You want to ask good questions. Again, because remember, there are some people who are passive-aggressive who you're even asking them face to face to get out what they need to get out, and what are they doing? They're not getting out. They're holding back. And they might say one or two things that aren't the real thing, and they hold back the real thing. And so if they hold it back, you can't ever deal with it in honesty, right? So I've always ask question, and then it's like, is there anything else? Like if you walk away from here, is there something else on your brain that you wish you would have said right now, kind of a thing. So try to get everything out on the table. That's real important. Remember this, unspoken expectations. Most people have expectations when they get into relationships, but most people don't name their expectations. They don't make clear requests. So they have unspoken expectations, and one of the things you learn is that expectations, particularly unspoken expectations, can be resentments waiting to happen. Pastoring a church, people come to churches for all different kinds of reasons. When I planted a church years ago, people would come into the church and they would have all kinds of unspoken expectations. And I remember one of my neighbors thought that I should be available for marriage counseling every minute of every day of the week. And I was going on a date and on a Friday night with my wife at the time, and they had a conflict, and they called me. This was back before we had, cell phones. This was and I picked up. And we're in a conflict. Can you come and counsel us? I'm going on a date with my wife. Let's set an appointment next week. I didn't realize it because they'd never given their expectation, but they left the church because I didn't meet them that night to do marriage counseling. That's an unspoken expectation. and after a while, I got to be where I thought, if you would walk in the church with a big sandwich board on you and list out all your expectations, pastors available 24/7, 7 days a week for counseling, I'd be like, yeah, this isn't the right church. I will not meet that expectation, right? So you can see all the different things that people bring into relationships. So when you have a conflict, you actually want to have a face-to-face and get it on the table. The other thing that you want to do when you're getting things out is you want to listen for needs and feelings. Needs and feelings. This is very, very hard to do, actually. Because if somebody's upset with you, you can feel defensive, right? And then we want to put our guard up and explain why we're right and they might be wrong. We always like right, wrong, right, wrong, right, wrong. I want to encourage you, in conflict resolution and people skills, there is right, there is wrong, but when we're trying to do reconciliation, that's not the primary thing, who's right, who's wrong. What we want to do is seek to understand needs and seek to understand feelings. This can be very challenging, but criticism and blame that many times can cause conflict, even judgment, is usually rooted in an unmet need. So if you don't get under the criticism and the blame and the judgment to the need, you don't know how to really solve the issue or even hear it clearly because you're not identifying with their need. And by the way, all humans have the same basic needs. We all want to love and be safe and be valued and be understood. And so we all have the same kind of needs. And so when we get to each other's basic needs and have the ears to listen to needs rather than criticism and blame, we're getting at the heart of the matter, not the external symptoms. And then identifying the feelings, because when we have an unmet need, we typically have feelings that are negative around that unmet need. But it can be very tricky. One of the books I'd recommend, surprise, surprise, this is a beautiful book, Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg. Highly recommend it. He has a crucial conversation or a conflict resolution style that not just works with families or executive teams. He's even applied this to nations, okay? Like, he's been at the highest levels of conflict resolution with nations. It's relatively relevant today. Yeah, right? So he was called on to do some mediation at a school board. And he met with the administrator who none of the school board liked. And so he met with the school board, he met with the administrator. But when he met with the school board without the administrator, it's okay, so what does he do that you don't like? And one of the guys says, he's got a big mouth. And Marshall's like going, well, I didn't ask you how big his mouth was. What does he do that you don't like? The next person says, he talks too much. Now, these are judgments, right? Big mouth, talks too much. He says, well, that's a judgment. What does he do that you don't like? Another person speaks up and says, he thinks he's the only smart person in the room. Again, it's a judgment, right? So finally somebody catches on and he says, well, when anything comes up in our staff meetings, he gets sidetracked, tells war stories, and it makes our meetings go way too long. It's very specific, names the behavior, and people feel devalued, right, if you get down to needs because their time's important and the meetings just go on and on and on and on and on. And so then nobody ever said anything to him except for the judgments, right? So he gets the whole group back together again. He'd actually talked through conflict resolution and how they're going to handle it. And they get everybody together and they ask the question again. So what is it that you guys don't like? And the first thing the guy says, Ed, you've got a big mouth. So Marshall's going, it was all out the window. Like he had to rebuild the whole thing again. So you see, even pointing out what we're wrestling with can be so full of judgments. So seeking to understand the person's need versus the judgment the blame, all those kind of things. So listen for needs, listen for feelings, explore those. And then here's the thing, when there's a hurt involved, you want to surface the hurt because you want to deal with the hurt before you start to try to fix it or try to problem solve it, okay? Because hurt feelings cause all kinds of reaction, judgment, all kinds of things, right? So in hurt feelings, like if I've hurt somebody, I always want to acknowledge it and let them know I'm sorry for that. That I'm so sorry that what I did. I had somebody, I was talking in a foyer with people before church, and I had one person, and then I had another person, and a couple was waiting, and they'd never talked to me face to face. I got done with this person, and then the service was starting. And they had waited a long while. They'd never talked to me in person, but I had to get into the service, and so I said, I'm going to have to connect to you later, and then I just went into the service. Well, they felt hurt. What would their need be that caused the hurt? What would their need be? Just to be seen, acknowledged, recognized. Nothing wrong with that at all, right? And it was the first time they'd waited to talk to me. So I went in. I wasn't out of touch with that, but several weeks later, they sent me a long email letting me know how hurt they had been. And so I was like, oh, dang, it was never in my heart to hurt them or make them feel less important, but it did, right? And so I remember meeting with them one-on-one, and I just listened, and I said, I'm so sorry that you felt that way, acknowledge the hurt. And then that allowed them the freedom to forgive me and then actually re-engage with the thing that they originally came to talk to me about in the first place. So healing hurts is a huge part of solving conflict. I have a friend who was driving down the road with his wife one day, and he was chewing his gum, making a smacking sound. And they'd been married a long time, and so this wasn't a new problem. It's not like he chewed gum all the time, but this day he was nervous. He put a piece of gum in his mouth. And he's just smacking it. And she gets on him for smacking his gum. Well, then he responded defensively, saying something that he didn't like about her. And she pushed back, and then he pushed back. Next thing you know, on the way to a meeting that they were doing together, they are pulling out a file cabinet of hurts that have been in the marriage. And they literally end up pulling the file cabinet and dumping, well, you always, well, you never. And they dumped all their past conflicts into this car ride, and it all started because he was chewing his gum, smacking his gum. They were screaming at each other before they got to the meeting. They ended up calling time out, going into the meeting, coming out, and then picking up where they left off. But here's one of the things. If we don't heal hurts along the way, they do pile up in a file cabinet. And then we can get triggered by past hurts because they've never been healed. I've done marriage counseling with couples who have past hurts that go 40 years deep, and they've never really dealt with the hurts in their file cabinet. That's a toxic thing that triggers so many things. So healing is so critically important. Healing wounds, healing hurts. Once you heal the hurts and once you hear the issues, the person might have 2 or 3 different issues, not just one issue. Once you get it all out on the table, you can kind of sort through it. And I always try to start with the biggest one and then work my way down, okay? And so that's a part of the conflict resolution skill set that you can grow in and learn. Most of you didn't learn this at home. Most of your families didn't do good, healthy conflict resolution. So we have to learn these new skill sets. I think we should always try to work toward a win-win solution if we can. I think we should always base ourselves in love. So it's always love, love. And I think that we can actually keep an open hand with people even if we disagree. even once you worked all that through, you've healed the hurts, you've listened and everything, and then you still have a disagreement on this or that or some perspective or thing you should do or shouldn't do or whatever, you can still keep an open hand of love and just say, hey, can we love each other through this disagreement? And if so, are we going to keep beating ourselves up over it? Or are we going to learn to love and accept? Okay, so this is good, healthy stuff. If you actually do this, where you get a person face to face, get it all out on the table, listen for needs and feelings, heal the hurts, you'll be amazed at how quickly, I'd say 90% of the time, you can get to a win-win or a love-love very quickly. Now, there's times when you can't. I remember I had a board member who was passive aggressive, and every time I'd meet with him face to face, we thought we'd had it healed, figured out and everything, and then he'd walk right out and go behind my back again. And I would call him in again, and then he'd do it again. And so I finally said, hey, let's go to counseling together, because this is a good friend of mine. I know him well. And so we went to counseling together. And with the counselor, we'd work through everything, and then he'd leave and go right back out and work behind my back again. Finally, he just left the church and resigned from the board. But I would have kept going to counseling trying to work on it, because like if he's doing that to me, guess what? Probably doing it to other people as well. And so there was a healing part of his heart, that passive aggressive part, that he needed healed. So I could see the need and the feelings and have empathy and still try to work through that and still love. And I to this day, I would keep an open hand with that person. I've bumped into him many times, and I hug him, I love him, I let him know I love him. But we never really did resolve that conflict, right? It does take two people to dance and resolve a conflict. And there are times when people won't dance. And that's where you have to let them go. And next week, we're going to talk about boundaries. Boundaries. So many people don't have healthy boundaries. So we're going to look at that issue next week. But it's beautiful to heal hurts and reconcile and make amends. I've been working in the recovery community now for almost 6.5 years. I remember meeting a person early on who was in recovery, and they had been in recovery, I think, over 15 years. But prior to being in recovery, this person had become so addicted to alcohol and drugs, they were homeless. In his words, I won't use the language that he would use, but he was, anyway, I won't even go there, all right? Sorry. I was trying to clean it up. He's like, I was pooping in a bucket, dude. I was homeless. He would just lay it right out there. And he's on his deathbed. Gets into an AA group, begins to work the steps, gets sober. But he had ruined his relationships with his kids and his parents for over a 20-year period of time. Just blown him out the water with his addiction. He gets in there, he gets to the steps where you make amends, and he goes to his kids and his dad and mom, and they don't even want to talk to him. They don't believe him. Why? Because he said he's sorry so many times and just right out and did the same thing over and over and over and over and over again. So he just kept it in his heart to keep being sober, to keep working the program, and just put them on a prayer list to say, God, one of these days, I pray that their hearts will open up. Well, he's now probably over 20 years sober. At year 13 years of sobriety and him basically living amends, his dad finally went, I think I can trust him. They reunited, healed their hurts, and they've become closest friends now. His kids have forgiven him. 13 years, but reconciliation happened. So I just want to encourage you that even if you do a meeting face-to-face and it doesn't go well, if we open our hearts in love and we focused on the needs and feelings, we can relate to those people. I've been in rooms where Palestinians and Israelis are in the same room. And I've done marriage counseling, and then I sat in the rooms with Palestinians and Israelis, and I'm like, this is just a family feud with bombs. And it's the Hatfields and the McCoys. Well, you killed our kids. Well, you killed our kids. Well, you started it. No, you started it. Well, I'm going to end it. No, I'm going to end it. And all of that violence just reinvigorates violence, right? And this is the way the world works. I realize that. But violence begets violence. Hatred begets hatred. And the only thing that can break the cycle is this kind of communication, where we get down to the basic needs and the basic feelings of people who don't feel safe because their kids were murdered by somebody's bomb. And terrorists emerge out of this. You have a sibling who gets murdered by somebody's bomb, you want to get back at them. And this is revenge, the cycle of revenge and hatred. And this is how our world works, I realize it. But Jesus is calling us to a different set of values, to where we see the humanity in other people, or we hear their needs, hear their feelings. And you'll be shocked if you peel back all the layers. I've watched Palestinians and Israelis who've had family members bombed to death reconcile because they went through a process of hearing each other's needs and feelings and finally humanize the other person. And then there can be love birthed out of brokenness, out of hatred, out of violence even. So, never give up, always hope, always love, always hold in your heart the highest values, and let's move toward those things. God, come and do a work in our hearts today. May we be people who move in love, walk in love. May we be people who value reconciliation, forgiveness, making amends, being honest, direct with our communication. May we avoid triangulation and passive-aggressive behavior out of fear. And may we have the courage and the strength to face these opportunities for growth. And so come and bring healing to our hearts today and help us to heal relationships as we live the way of Jesus. We pray this in your name. Amen.